Now I want to go ahead and introduce tonight's alums. So we have Ty Smith. He is a graduate of the class of 1994, where he majored in communications. Ty is now a senior vice president of the regional executive private wealth manager at Regions Bank in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm so looking forward to hearing from Ty and having this informational interview today. I feel like he's going to be able to provide a lot of insight and wisdom on his role within the private wealth management industry. Ty, just go ahead and introduce yourself and give us some insights into your career trajectory.
Sure, thank you. And it's so glad to be with each of you. I've connected with the university a number of times at different college recruiting fairs or just students gathering at somebody's house in the city. So it's great to be able to give back and share a little bit of my story from quite some time ago. As Megan said, my current role today is I'm the regional wealth executive at Regions Bank for both Georgia and South Carolina. And effectively, what that means is I'm just providing overall executive leadership to how we really grow new clients in that marketplace, find new clients, as well as the service experience that we deliver for clients, taking care of the folks who are already here and making sure that we're delivering everything that they need. When I think back on my career and how I got here, I've been working for approximately 25 years, maybe a little bit longer than that. And it sort of started in a haphazard kind of fashion. People always ask me, how did you get started in finance or banking and whatnot? And it really wasn't deliberate. There was no master plan of one day I want to grow up and be a banker, or I want to go do investments or do X, Y, Z. It really all happened by accident. When I was at UVA, I was focused on two different tracks in terms of my major. One was philosophy, where I had enough credits to pursue that degree, but the other was rhetoric and communications. And the philosophy part was just like everybody, there's this pressure when you become a third year or right before that of, okay, what am I going to be when I grow up? I have to pick something. And it seemed like half of my friends were picking, pre-law or pre-med and all that stuff. So I said, sure, hey, I'll pick one, pre-law, why not? And I started working on the curriculum to get there. And then for me, you kind of start to discover what your strengths and weaknesses are, what you like, what you don't like. And how I actually got involved in this career was my fourth year Christmas holiday break. So I grew up in Roanoke, Virginia, which is right down the street from Charlottesville, about an hour and a half away. That's my hometown. And so obviously I was going back home for the holiday. And what happened is I was like, hey, I think I'm supposed to be like doing some internships or externships or something like that, right? So let me see if I can get this externship going. And so I got a 1-week externship that was back in my hometown, Roanoke, Virginia, with a bank back in those days that used to be called First Union. And First Union, if you went back and did all the research, there was First Union, then First Union and Wachovia combined, and then Wachovia was acquired by Wells Fargo in the last recession or downturn about 10 years ago. So effectively, that company is now part of Wells Fargo, but that's really the company that I started with. And what happened in this 1-week externship was I went to the
Uh-oh. Ty, you frozen on us.
And at that moment in time, whoops, hey, can you hear me?
We can. So you froze on us and then you muted. So the last we heard was you were going into Roanoke and you got the internship with, I think it was First Union Bank. So if we wanted to rewind to that, that would be great.
Hey, Megan, you there?
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's a little bit better.
Okay.
All right, so you can hear me and hopefully everybody else can still see me.
Yep. So let's just rewind to your internship with First Union Bank in Roanoke.
Okay, all right. Yeah. So I had this internship with First Union Bank, and and so what happened was the person who set up my externship there, they did a really good job of just making sure that I got to meet a lot of the leaders of the bank. So I got to meet retail banking leaders, commercial banking leaders, people on the investment side, brokerage, all those different departments. And so what was good about that was it just gave me a great feel for what the bank does and what those jobs were like. But really the most impactful part of that 1 week externship was they set up a one-on-one for me and the president of the bank at that point in time. And the president of the bank at that point in time was leading the Virginia, Maryland, and DC markets. And so to be able to sit across from the lead executive, talk about my aspirations for coming out of school and what I thought I wanted to do in the world of finance and whatnot, I just really made an impression on that individual in that moment of time that I got. And I think it worked so well that that executive said, I like him, he's sharp, he's polished. Let's make sure we get him on board, go through the on-grounds interviewing process back when you get back to UVA. And I did all that, and I just felt like the road was paved for me to join the organization. So that's how it originally started. And then after that, 25 years of different moves and roles and whatnot, but that's how I initially joined the bank and the banking industry.
That is so interesting. Thank you so much, Todd, for sharing. So let's see. Let's kind of go back to your time at UVA. How do you feel like your major in liberal arts really translated to your career in banking, especially since that's not where you were intending to go initially?
Sure. So I think my major had a really critical part to me joining the bank and going that direction. And really there's two aspects of that. There's sort of the philosophy, real analytical, sort of detailed analysis part of that major. But the major, I think that really took me over the top was just the communications major.
Mm-hmm.
And I forgot when UVA transitioned away from rhetoric and communications majors. Maybe that happened 5 or 10 years after I left. And I don't know if they even have that department anymore, or maybe it's been folded into something else. But that was really the group or the major that you had if you wanted to be like a TV newscaster. My dream was I wanted to be an ESPN sports reporter and kind of call the news and the sports all night. And just doing that type of work. I mean, and in that major, you were forced into sort of public debate with your peers. You had to get on stage and, hey, they just throw you a topic and you had to come up with a couple of bullet points, pros and cons against it, and argue that against someone else. And so you kind of get real skilled at thinking on your feet. You understand how to build relationships. You understand how to read body language of other people that you're interacting with. And I think just getting comfortable with being uncomfortable is really what took me over the top in terms of just that communications major and that background.
Awesome. That's really great insight. I don't think that there is a rhetoric and communications, but I know there's media studies major now. And then of course your traditional, like more English type major. I was actually a media studies major myself. So yeah, that's kind of a commonality. So what is private wealth management? Explain it to me in layman's terms.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this, and I was doing some Googling and trying to come up with like the technically correct answer. And whichever website you go to, whether it's Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley or Regions or Wells Fargo, somebody's got a different answer as to what wealth management is. But for me, I came up with this explanation, and I just describe it like this: working collaboratively with high net worth clients to meet their needs through the use of financial and asset management strategies. I think it's really that basic of just working collaboratively with high net worth clients, prospects,
Mm-hmm.
to help them meet their needs through financial and asset management tools. That's all it is.
Okay, awesome. So what you're saying is that do you work mostly with like individuals, or do you work with like organizations?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I'll try to explain why this world of wealth management is just so dynamic and why it's ever changing. So when you think about what we're trying to deliver for clients, there's really a couple of different things. And first of all, I want to start out with what the needs are or what the needs might be. But because it's very different. I think if you were to go to just a pure brokerage or investment shop and all you're delivering is just the investment experience, hey, we research a lot of managers, we put them together in a portfolio for you, trust us, we do a good job. That's really a very investment-oriented conversation.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about wealth management, I think most wealth management shops would probably say what they do spans maybe 10 to 15 different needs that clients could have. One of those being investment management. And so when I think about what we do in my group and on my team and the different things that we touch, I'll give you just a brief listing of what some of those needs are. And then I'll talk about some of the people that we do that for.
Mm-hmm.
So as an example, you've got asset management. And so when you think about asset management, most people think about traditional investments and stocks and bonds and all that kind of stuff. But there are also asset management things that we manage as it relates to just oil, timber, pine in South Georgia, agricultural, you're talking soybean, peanuts. I mean, all of that stuff is out there where you've got big farms, people who have significant holdings. I mean, people could have 500 acres in South Georgia or Southern Virginia or somewhere like that. That needs to, and that wood needs to be culled, it needs to be sold, it needs to be spaced out so it grows properly. There's all those kind of needs. And then if you were in somewhere like Houston or the Texas market, you could have different needs that are more important, like oil, which is obviously very prominent in that marketplace. So asset management covers a lot of different areas, not just stocks and bonds, traditional investing, hedge funds, alternatives, all that kind of stuff. What we also look at in terms of needs would be credit strategies. So when you're talking credit strategies, you're thinking, okay, I want to borrow for a car, I want to borrow for a mortgage or lines of credit, those kind of things. Well, and that's true, but it's just that with wealthy individuals and families, maybe you're talking about a boat that's, $300,000, $500,000. You might be talking about a yacht that's $5 million that's docked somewhere in Miami or Naples. So there's a broad range of what people are using credit for. And sometimes they could just be using credit to, hey, I'd rather borrow the bank's money at a very cheap rate, keep my investments invested where they are. And I know if I can deploy those assets by borrowing into my business, I can make 10% on my money in my business. So there's different ways to have strategic use of credit, and we get to work side by side with clients when they're considering that. There's other topics like divorce planning that happens, right? I mean, 50% of the world, it's happening that unfortunately they're splitting ways. That's an important topic. Managing trust and estates, financial planning. The other thing that's really important for clients that have that level of net worth is philanthropic or charitable planning. So when you think about some of the gifts that have been made here recently and where folks are allocating dollars, there are folks who are allocating $5, $10, $20 million to, I want to go fix that problem. And that problem could be education, it could be economic empowerment, it could be lack of healthcare resources in a certain community. For folks who have that level of net worth or wealth, and something really has kind of gotten under their skin that they want to fix, they're doing a lot of philanthropic and charitable work, and we get to be there side by side with them. Special needs trust. There's a number of relationships that I've had over the years where, unfortunately someone got in a car accident. They were injured for what's going to be the rest of their life. There was some sort of settlement. And if that happened to a young child, but now those parents are aging, those parents have real concerns of who's going to be here to take care of my child who has very special and unique needs to an accident that took place 20 years ago, and they're still not capable of taking care of themselves or handling their finances properly, or other affairs. Someone's got to be there to do that. So, and then finally, there's like risk management needs. Typically, the higher your wealth level, the more you're probably at risk for adverse things happening, somebody falling on your property, maybe litigious lawsuits or things of that nature. So there's just different tools and techniques that people use to try to minimize as much of that risk as possible. So those are just, like I said, that's the difference, I think, between wealth management and just pure investment management, which is what you probably tend to gravitate to when you think about wealth management. We're covering just a very, very wide range of needs in every aspect that a client could have, not just the investment conversation. When I think about the people that we do that for, there's a wide range of people we could do that for. So you could think about business owners, right? I mean, that could be the person who's 25 years old or 30 and they're doing a startup business and they have very, very basic needs and they're just trying to get going. And it could be the sophisticated business owner who's been at it for 20 or 25 years. They're running a company that's producing 20, 50, 100 million in revenue every year. And maybe after running it for 30 years, their next thought is, how do I transition the business? How do I get out of this? Is there a buyer for my business, or am I going to transition it to family members? Are those family members competent and able to take over this business? Do they want to work in wholesaling chickens or something like that? I mean, they may not want to do that. Or do they have the same love for what I created that I do? And frequently they don't. So we work with business owners. We work with retirees, people who just worked really, really hard for a long time and saved well, made smart decisions, paid off their debt. And now they look up and they've got a pool of assets that they want to just have someone help and support them managing and whatnot. That's another group of people that we work with, retirees. The other group would be just high income earners. And that would typically be your medical professionals, whether it's cancer specialist or gastro or, any of the anesthesiologists, any of those kind of specialties that have really, really high incomes, along with attorneys who do really well in their particular specialties of where they work. And then probably the final bucket of what we work with in terms of people or families would be legacy wealth builders. And what I mean by that is just, a lot of the folks who are the bedrock of this country who built and created just incredible empires 100 years ago, 150 years ago, 50 years ago. They're now on the second, third, fourth, fifth generation of that legacy wealth that's just been growing and growing and growing over the course of time. And there's just any number of examples you could think about, big companies that are still out there, or even private companies that are out there, where just that legacy wealth has been created. And frequently when you have legacy wealth, you have some children or descendants who are skilled at taking care of that wealth. And you have some children where mom and dad know deep in their heart that Bobby or Susie or whoever it might be, they're not going to be good stewards of that wealth. And I need to create a structure that can help protect them and preserve this and not have it wasted recklessly. And that's where you might see a wealthy family leverage our type of capabilities to make sure that that wealth is going to be preserved and not wasted for reckless items, purely because maybe those kids just never developed the financial skill set to do it themselves. So in summary, those are some of the needs that we work with and how they vary, along with some of the different types of people that we work with, ranging from business owners to retirees to high income to legacy wealth.
That is really cool. It sounds very strategic and purposeful. And I can totally tell where the thinking on your feet is helpful in those scenarios.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So kind of building off of that, how did you develop the skill set necessary for private wealth management outside of your coursework? And maybe at this point, it was more of just banking or finance outside of your coursework.
Yeah. So really how I developed the skill set, I'd say a couple of different things. I'd say the way that I managed my career, and I want to be clear to everybody on the line, that there was no like big master strategy here of I'm working to be in that role 25 years from now. It just sort of happened. But I do think I made a few good decisions. I was always, for me, and I think a lot of students who go to UVA, you really have this incredible thirst for knowledge, no matter what that knowledge is. And even though I had joined the bank and I was on this sort of finance or banking track, I was always intrigued about pushing myself into uncomfortable places and learning some skills or learning another job that I had never worked in before, purely because I was just simply intrigued about, okay, I'm just curious, how does that work? And can I go work in that role for just 1 to 2 to 3 years and really learn something new? And so I think, number one, the bank is really, really good when you first join the organization about giving you the adequate training and the necessary training to perform the role. And what I mean by that is, even if you were to join in our retail branches, and not just at Regions, but other firms, they're going to give you the training on here's how you actually make smart loans and make good credit decisions when you're extending loans to borrowers. They're going to give you the training on here's the brokerage licenses that you might need to sell certain products. And so in order to pass those tests, you've got to, study quite a bit and put in quite a few hours to get that information underneath your belt to understand the different investment vehicles. Here's how they work. Here's what they do in adverse environments in the market. Here's what they do in positive environments in the market. You've got to know that stuff. And clients are pretty sharp. I mean, I think back in the day, 30, 40 years ago, when you think about the world of just investments, and you kind of used to keep up with your stocks by whatever got printed in the paper that day, and it was yesterday's price. Now everybody's got that on their phone real time. So it's not uncommon that we're in meetings with clients who are pulling up their portfolios, who are telling me, yeah, Apple's up 2% today. What do you think about that? And they just announced XYZ, and they're telling me that before I know it. So the access to information has changed dramatically out there in the world. And that just means that anybody who's a finance professional has got to be on their toes at all times with what's happening in the marketplace. The bank is going to certainly, as I said before, give you all the training that you need, help you and support, and possibly pay financially for you to acquire some of those more basic licenses to sell some of those products, or to get your insurance license, to place life insurance and those kind of things, or to sell some investment products. I think after you move past those basic sort of levels, that's where you tend to see people want to pursue some of the advanced designations. And some of the advanced designations would be that require multiple years of work, would be going to get your CFP, Certified Financial Planner designation. It would be going to get your CFA. So for folks who really want to be just hardcore portfolio managers, and really love the world of investments, getting the CFA, the Chartered Financial Analyst designation, could be pretty important. On the trust and administration side, there's a designation called a CTFA, which is a Certified Trust and Financial Advisor. That designation tends to be really important in that trust administrative type world. So I think as you look at folks who are probably 10, 15, 20 years into their career, you tend to see more of that sort of educational technical expertise popping up in their backgrounds, along with, good BA degrees or, undergraduate degrees or MBAs and whatnot, along with those certified degrees or designations that you can get to round out your technical background.
That's awesome to hear. I know oftentimes when I talk to students, they want to pick their career in undergrad, and they want to say like, I'm going to go straight into that out of undergrad. And what I'm hearing you say is that it's kind of baby steps along the way. So pick your first thing, learn as much as you can in that first thing, and that'll lead you to your second thing, and then so on and so forth.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, and once again, I know it probably feels kind of basic, but when I first started with the bank, or with First Union back in the day, I was in this 1-year training program, and most large corporations have these formal training programs, management training programs, or whatever, associate programs that they put people through for some are like 1 year, some are multiple years, where you go get trained in just different specialties, different groups. And then, 2 or 3 years later, you get to sort of raise your hand and say, you know what, I really like corporate banking, or, hey, I really like institutional, or I really like retail or commercial. You kind of get to raise your hand and say, I really think my skill set and what I really enjoy so far leans toward this. I did that, and that positioned me for being out in retail and the consumer branches. But after I did that for 4 years, that's really where my wealth management career started. So the branches gave me just a great foundation for basic banking, a little bit of credit, doing home loans and some basic investments and whatnot. And then I had a choice. I actually had the choice of 4 years into my career, I could either go to DC, Washington, DC, and I could work as a brokerage assistant supporting a broker, or I could take this opportunity in Atlanta, which is where I'm at today. And the opportunity in Atlanta was working with the wealth management group. And so for me, when I thought about what I valued at that moment in time, it was either, okay, I can go here and I can sell investments, and I've been really, really good at selling and positioning investments, or I can go to this wealth management group where those folks are talking about, lots of different needs and lots of different angles and things that could be important in a client's picture. And I was like, for me, I find that a little bit more stimulating and intriguing to learn about 10 different buckets than really to become a master or a guru of 1 or 2 different buckets. And I wanted that sort of broad knowledge, which is why I went into wealth management.
That's really cool. Thank you for sharing. So let's see, I'm trying to even decide what I just am loving having this conversation with you. So I'm trying to decide which way I want to go next. So let's see, due to COVID-19, a lot of students have lost their traditional internship opportunities. What would you suggest they do to take advantage of this downtime or this summer where they maybe don't have that traditional internship, but could be doing other things to prepare themselves for their career?
Yeah, so I would say 2 things. One is, so COVID-19 has obviously been a big change for all of us. I think I got kicked out of and kick's out a strong word. I think we all were sort of asked to leave quickly probably sometime in mid-March because of COVID concerns. And I'm not sure that we'll even physically be back in our office. I mean, we're still going back in from time to time. If there's something that you can't print for a certain reason at home, or a specialty document, you still might run by the office to go pick that up when nobody else is there. But we may not formally even get back in our offices for a full 5 to 6 month period. And so what I would say is, during this period, what's interesting is, I think after the first 60 to 90 days of COVID, I think everyone started to just think about, okay, how do we get back to whatever the new normal is going to be? Because it is going to be a new normal. It's not going to be the same normal that we were used to in February. And so I think as we've all embraced that and tried to think about that's had a lot of change. It's had a change in terms of how I personally and my team interact virtually with all the partners that we typically work with, now that none of us are seeing each other face to face anymore. How do we interact with clients in this virtual manner, and really bring clients with us? It's sort of like we've had enough training sessions online to teach all of us at the bank how to use WebEx and Zoom and Microsoft Teams and those different resources. But now we've got to spring that on a 65-year-old, right? And say, this might be the way that we talk to each other, for the next 3 to 6 months, because you certainly don't want to expose elderly folks to any sort of risk with COVID, since there's a perception that they may be more at risk than others. What I would tell students is, now that we've kind of gotten past that sort of initial shock and awe moment, actually our recruiting efforts are probably more dialed up than they ever have been at this moment in time. And to that fact, I just hired someone Friday virtually who I've never met. So we are still recruiting. We are still trying to bring great people on. There is this expectation that, maybe by the time there's a vaccine out there, and is that a 6, 12, 18-month thing? I mean, I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. But at some point, we've still got to deliver for customers and take care of them. And we've still got to find a way to run our business the best way we can. And running our business means we've still got to go out there and find new recruits, new talent, new folks coming right out of college that can help be accretive to the organization and what we're trying to build. That work still has to happen, even if it's going to happen in a virtual format. So I would say, even though it's different at the moment and everybody's struggling through it to try to figure out next steps, I would not get deterred by that. I would keep pushing on. I still have 1 to 2 other positions I still need to fill on my team right now. And everybody's actively doing virtual interviews right now with those prospects who could join our team. So it's still moving forward. I think the other thing I would say is while you've got this downtime, and this is going to be really hard to understand, and I didn't understand it when I was back in college, but really try to start being honest with yourself about what your strengths and weaknesses potentially could be. And start to think about, where do I shine? Where and when am I at my best with the things that I like to do? And what I mean by that, I'll give you a great example. Years ago, probably 20 years ago, when I was thinking about my next step, someone had set up an interview for me. They were like, hey, I know somebody you could talk to. Go talk to this guy who's like the CEO of Invesco. And Invesco is located here in Atlanta. They're really a high-end investment shop. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, within like just a couple of days of talking to somebody, this guy set up a lunch for me to go talk with the CEO and meet this person. I was like, wow, this is crazy. And I met this guy, and we had this great conversation over lunch. And what he said to me was, Ty, when you think about the world of investments, it is such a big world, and there's a lot of different things that you could do in this world. And I was like, okay, like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, think about it. If you're working in this world, you could be a portfolio manager sitting at your desk, managing portfolios for wealthy clients and families, and you might get great enjoyment out of that and do that for 30 or 40 years of your career. You could be a hedge fund guy. You could be working on Wall Street. You could be working at a 1-800 call center, answering phone calls from investment clients over the phone and taking care of them that way. You could be doing investment analyst research and whatnot, researching companies or stocks. You could be working as a mutual fund wholesaler. I mean, he just gave me example after example. You could be working in retirement services, helping people manage their 401ks and things like that. And I think the point he was trying to make is, it is such a big world out there when it comes to investments. You really have to think about what part of it that you like. And are you really the type of person that is going to enjoy sitting in an office, staring at 2 or 3 screens around you, watching them go from red to green, positive to negative in terms of stock prices. Is that really what you're going to enjoy along with going out meeting clients and families? And or are you the kind of person where you really get your energy and your drive from others? You love client interactions. You love engaging with people. You love talking about their families. You love helping them meet their needs in whatever realm it's going to be and whatnot. And is that what really brings you energy day to day? And after he told me that, and I was actually in a portfolio management role, managing portfolios, picking stocks. And that was one of those moments where, as I said earlier, after I left the branches, I moved to Atlanta. I worked in sales in Buckhead, the area downtown, for a couple of years. And then this opportunity popped up on the other side to go be a portfolio manager for a couple of years. Mm-hmm. And for me, at that moment in time, it was a lateral sideways move for me. I just always wanted to be able to say, I've managed portfolios. I've picked Home Depot versus Lowe's, Apple versus Google, or whatever versus whatever. And at that point in time, we actually were picking individual stocks. And I had responsibility for the basic materials sector as well as the technology sector. So I had to come back to our group of 7 or 8 people and say, these are the top 5 to 6 names we need to be buying in the space. Even though there's 20 names to choose from, these are the ones that we need to buy, where we need to enter, where we need to exit. I wanted the practice of having that discipline and saying I had done that before. Mm-hmm. And that was important to me. But I think also after doing that, and after sitting in the office and staring at the screen, going red to green, I realized after doing a couple of years of that, hey, I'm glad I did that. And I really enjoyed that role. And I still use it today in my own personal situation. But where I derive my personal energy from is interacting with others, hearing the stories, getting to know these families, building that trust and relationship, and being seen as a strategic partner to help that family meet its goals and objectives. That's where I get my energy. Not being the person who's solely 100% focused on investments. And so where I'm going with this is, I think as you learn stuff in college and at the university and whatnot, and as you start to get to know yourself a little bit better, the best thing you can do is be very honest with yourself about, where do I tend to shine? Where do I tend to show up well? Where do I tend to have an impact when I'm bringing my skills and the education that I've learned, when I'm bringing that to bear in a role, building my own company or working at someone else's company? Where do I tend to shine, and how do I do more of that? And I think the quicker you can figure that out in your career, the quicker every day is going to feel like a vacation. I don't feel like I go to work working. I feel like, wow, somebody has put me in charge of this organization to go do something that I could do in my sleep. It's easy because it's where I get my energy and it's where I thrive.
I love that. So I'm hearing, students, if you, during this time, use it to reflect on what you could bring to the field, what sets you apart from others. I also love that for the pure reason that, we probably have 12 different majors on this call today, and those having different majors gives you different tools to bring to different industries.
And I've got a follow-up point on that. And this will give you just a great example. So when I first joined, First Union 25 years ago, our class was about 30, young students. Some actually weren't fresh out of college. Some were probably 25 or 26-year-old, just a couple of years removed from being out of college. Mm-hmm. And of those 30, I'd say 20 probably had finance, economics, traditional sort of finance backgrounds that you would look to see in banking. And there were 10 of us who were non-traditional, people who had communications degrees, people who came, there was one person who literally came from managing hotels and restaurants and worked in that industry. And when you think about the skill set of that industry, if you're in any sort of high profile position, working in restaurants or working with the hotel industry, you are probably face to face with people every minute of the day, engaging others. And that was the skill set they brought to the table. It wasn't that I'm the encyclopedia of everything investments. It was, I'm highly skilled at building relationships with those I come in contact with. I'm very highly skilled at making people comfortable, putting them at ease, and being in a position where they see me as an advisor to help them make great decisions. That was the skill set they brought to the table. And so on that point, I wouldn't feel like hey, if I don't have this hardcore background that leads to finance and whatnot, that world is impossible for me, or I can't make it there. I think I'm proof that you can make it there. I think there absolutely are tons of companies that are, some of the top that are out there in the world that are looking for non-traditional people to step into roles. I mean, even Google and Apple and whatnot are advertising that they're looking for people with different skill sets than your typical hardcore engineering or tech person to come into their company. They don't need 1,000 people running around who all think the same and act the same and feel like things should be executed the same. I love it when people challenge me or come to the table with a different idea or come with a different perspective. That's how you grow, is when people come in with something that is just out in left field and it's like, I'd never looked at it that way or thought about it that way, but you've got a point there. What if you actually tweaked it that way? That could be effective. I love it when that kind of energy and dynamic is in the room.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ty, for sharing that with us, and also just kind of putting at ease any student who's like, I could never do banking and finance because I don't have a banking and or finance major. So you've told us a lot about the things you really enjoy about private wealth management. I'd like to hear maybe one thing you don't love as much about private wealth management.
Yeah, the one thing I would say is I think if you've worked in this industry for a while, which I have, and based on where you're coming from, you probably could be a little bit frustrated at times about the pace of change and how quickly that does or does not happen. And so from where I'm going, you probably can guess that it probably does not happen all that fast. and here's what I mean by that is, I think, so I'll just give an example tied to credit. And what I mean by credit is lending to different people. When you think about credit, particularly with wealthy individuals and families, I mean, these might be people who are buying distinctive properties or huge farms in Charlottesville, folks who are buying beach properties, along the coastline, wherever you might be, folks who are buying second or third homes in Vail or Colorado or those kind of resort, Jackson Hole, those kind of places. I mean, that's what some of those folks are doing in terms of living their lives. And I think sometimes when you're inside the company, you might say, hey, we should just give that person $10 million for their house in Vail. Why not? They're good for it, right? Great credit, great financials and whatnot. And I think when you're in good times, that looks like a very logical decision. I think the good thing about age is there are people who probably are on board who have witnessed the last recession 10 years ago, people who may have witnessed recessions 20, 25 years ago, people who may have witnessed, no, hey, I've been around. I mean, during the last recession, I personally had people that I knew who had $500,000 homes that turned into $300,000 homes with the recession 10 years ago. And you might think that, oh, that's crazy, that's impossible. No, that's reality. That can happen in really, really bad environments. And if you haven't personally experienced those environments, you might be saying, hey, let's push this direction, or hey, the bank should do this, or hey, we could launch into a new market over there. There probably are some folks around who've had a little bit of experience and witnessed a few bad times to realize that the things that you think never could happen, it's capable that those things could happen. And we as a firm just want to make sure that we don't put the firm at risk by making poor decisions or decisions that are a little bit too far out there in left field. That doesn't mean that we wouldn't lend to somebody for a second property in Vail or anywhere else that you might name it. Maybe the right decision is, okay, we'll give them $7 million of that $10 million. Let's see them put $3 million of their own cash and equity into the deal to give us a little bit of cushion. You just structure it a slightly different way to make sure you're protecting the bank and not exposing yourself to too much risk.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, that seems anxiety provoking at times.
Yeah.
When I think about handling that much money for someone else. So thank you so much for sharing. So we are coming to the point where I'd like to open it up for questions from students. I have more questions to ask, but I'd love to hear from the students. So please feel free to drop any questions that you have in the chat box, and I will read them to Ty, and Ty will think on his feet and answer them.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see. Victoria is saying, Ty, thank you for sharing your experience. What advice would you give to someone with an accounting background that's interested in a role like yours? Do you think it would be worth pursuing the CPA license?
Yes, Absolutely, I do. I mean, I mean, that's a very rigorous path to take, getting your CPA license. And, that would definitely give you some very in-depth knowledge in the weeds about clients and their financials and how the numbers work. No, I would say that background is very, very welcome in the world of financial services. I've certainly have some team members who have those backgrounds and have those skills. And really, this is hard to believe, but when you look inside the bank, there are tons and tons of attorneys, accounting professionals, and you would be shocked by, okay, why are there like so many lawyers that are running around the bank? And there's a part of that, which is, everyone, when you're 18 or 22 and you're like, hey, that's the path for me, and that's what I always dreamed of, or hey, it looked cool on TV or whatever it is. And then after you get into those roles, sometimes, I mean, my best friend from UVA graduated from UVA Comm School, went and got a JD MBA from William and Mary, and right now he doesn't work in law whatsoever. He's out doing custom real estate deals, and other things that are in financial services, but he's not doing anything whatsoever related to law. Now he knows that work and knows that field and whatnot, but I think for him it was just like, hey, this isn't really the path that I thought it was going to be or the path that was right for me, but I'm really intrigued by this over here. And the reality is you may not discover that until you're 26 or 30 or 32, switching between careers. And so, no, I would say your degree absolutely is welcome. That path would be very useful at any organization focused on financial services and taking good care of clients. Absolutely.
Thank you, Todd. All right. Do any other students have questions? All right. Kate said, if you could go back and redo something, what would it be? Ooh, a reflective question. I like that.
If I could go back and redo something, probably two things. Number one is I probably wouldn't have gotten started so late trying to find this 1 week externship, like my last break of my fourth year. I think about, so I interview lots of young students and young adults, and I'm just amazed. I mean, back when, so the little community where I grew up, there's just some really special dynamics that were in place there. And one of those dynamics were pretty much the entire community of children that I grew up with, or kids like me, all of us were first generation college goers. So none of us had one parent that had ever gone to college. My father just got his GED probably 15 years ago. There were a couple of people, a couple of my cousins got into UVA, and they were good academically, but they also got football scholarships. So they were like starting linebackers on UVA's football team back in the early 90s and whatnot. But for me, there was just this incredible gap since no one had gone before us to figure out how to get to college, or to figure out what you need to be doing to prepare yourself. There was just this incredible gap where all of us were just stumbling through it blindly. And what I mean by that is, when I was in high school, I'm taking these AP courses and whatnot, and there were some AP courses where I didn't even take the final exam at the end of the year after the school year to give myself credit for that going into UVA. And part of it was I just didn't realize it was that critical or important. I kind of blew off the test. And it was just like, after you get to UVA and people are like, oh yeah, I showed up with X amount of credits, you're like, oh, why didn't I take that test, right? So there's just things like that where it's like just not knowing had an incredible impact. I don't have that excuse now, but certainly every one of us who went to UVA or Virginia Tech or JMU, all of us were just stumbling through it as first generation college goers. I think the other thing that I would, in some ways I wish I could take it back, but I don't. When I got to UVA, I pledged one of the Black service fraternities, Kappa Alpha Psi, and I did that my first year. And I didn't have any legacy or anybody who had ever pledged a fraternity or sorority in front of me. I didn't know anything about it at all. Like I said, I just kind of do this stuff out of the blue. I like to make myself uncomfortable and just try things. And so I did this my first year, and it was just a disaster. Like my first semester at UVA was awesome, had great grades. My second semester was just such a disaster. I had to go to summer school at UVA to stay in school right after my first year. So my parents were like, what have you done? You've gone to this school. We're paying all this money. You've like destroyed your chances and whatnot. And that probably did ruin my chances of getting into comm school. I went to summer school and got incredible grades and started to catch back up. But when I think about that experience, I certainly wish I wouldn't have had that experience because I probably would have had a few more choices. I do think that I eventually wound up where I probably should have wound up. And I wouldn't take back being in my fraternity for 4 straight years. I mean, I think that was very rewarding. And I think for me, what was probably rewarding about that was I got to meet other incredibly strong people from other cities who were like, hey, my dad's running for mayor of Atlanta. My mom and dad are both doctors. And I didn't experience that where I grew up. Where I grew up, everyone around me that were working at fast food restaurants, they were laborers doing incredibly hard work in steel mills or tire plants and whatnot. That was probably my first exposure in my life to actually realizing that there were people who looked just like me who were capable of succeeding at that level in life. And I had never witnessed that before in 18 years. So I wouldn't take anything away from my experience at UVA, but certainly the fraternity experience kind of got in the way there for a minute.
Thank you so much for sharing, and I'm sure that we can all relate to that story in some way, shape, or form. So that just as we were talking before the students got online, it just shows that we're all human, right? Um, all right, we have Angela who said, your advice is super encouraging. Can you talk more about the collaborative aspect of working alongside clients? How do you deal with conflict when your client disagrees with your strategic advice? And in general, how did you improve your skill at developing working relationships with clients?
Well,
Right.
okay, you'll have to read. You can read some of those back to me. I'll go to the first one.
Okay.
So in terms of how I enjoy working side by side with clients strategically, that is the part of the job that I love the most. And what I mean by that is, in this world, you're not just dealing with clients with like basic banking needs and, hey, can you give me some money on this second house and those kind of things. You really start to become a confidant, a trusted advisor to those clients. And for me, I always wanted to position myself to where if my client wants to make any move whatsoever financially, they're thinking about me as the first stop. And along with me being the first stop, they're calling their CPA to understand the financials behind it. And they're also engaging their legal team or their attorney to make sure that everything's buttoned up in terms of any legal work, crossing T's and dotting I's. So those are really the 3 legs of the stool: financial advice, CPA, attorney, that most clients have working side by side with them as strategic partners every day. And when you're doing that, you're going to get to hear about, wow, hey, there's this business idea. There's this manufacturing plant. It's like 20 miles away. The person is under a little bit of duress and wants to sell it. And if I actually got that, wow, I could make X widgets. They're selling those widgets to the Department of Defense and whatnot, and there's a great business opportunity there. And you're working side by side with them as they're reviewing the financials, they're playing it out, they're looking at pro formas of what the revenue could be 4 or 5 years. I mean, you were in the mix with that client as they're making those decisions. And that is so empowering if you've maneuvered yourself into that position as trusted advisor with that client. Even when I think about the charitable work, I mean, I can't tell you how many meetings I've sat in with clients who have incredible pools of money. And they're like, look, from our private foundation, we want to support XYZ charitable causes. Ty, you're in that world. Who in this city do you think is having an incredible impact on fixing broken education and downtrodden communities where kids in 5th grade are reading at 2nd grade levels? Mm-hmm. Who's doing the best work in that regard? Can you go with me to evaluate that nonprofit organization or whoever that might be and help me make a decision on whether or not to allocate $100,000 to them? Mm-hmm. That's just incredibly impactful work with real money behind it, where you get to be side by side. And then also, when they do buy that really nice boat and whatnot, sometimes they'll invite you to just visit them on the boat to do their investment review or to do their annual update and whatnot. And you're drifting around the water. I mean, that's a pretty cool experience as well. But so no, I think that's always been, that's the part of it I love the most. In terms of resolving conflict, I tend to tell people I don't go looking for conflict, but when it comes to me, I sure don't duck it. And I've always found in my career that the more things that are negative tend to dwell and linger on, they never get better. And so that's very uncomfortable for a lot of people. There's a lot of people in this world who are just incredibly uncomfortable with things that create tension or conflict or anxiety. And I think that if there's something like that is out there with a client or other aspects of your life, there's a right way and a wrong way to say things. And some of that is, a lot of it is how you frame it up. I mean, you don't want to go straight to a client and say, hey, that's a terrible decision, a bad decision, I would never make that. You probably don't want to say it quite like that. It may be more of like, wow, another perspective on that could be, hey, if this happens or if that happens, that could have a little bit more of a negative outcome. How would you manage through that if that situation or that scenario unfolded? And so the point of saying it that way is more so to just put sort of in the client's mind, hey, I think that this is golden and it's great and nothing could go wrong here. Well, hey, let's think about what if this unfolded, or what if the revenue didn't match your expectations, or what if this or one of your main suppliers or vendors that you work with, they decided not to do business with you anymore. They went with someone else. Would that impact 30% of your revenue? What would be plan B if that scenario unfolded? And so you're not necessarily creating conflict. I think you're kind of raising the points maybe that the client doesn't see or hasn't seen yet. And you're just asking them to consider an alternative view and testing into whether or not they've thought through that alternative view. So a lot of it's just kind of how you do it and how you position it. And then I think there was a third point on that.
There was, how did you develop the skill of working relationships with clients?
Yeah, a lot of practice. I mean, and you're going to laugh at this, but early in my career, bank training is interesting. And when I say it's interesting is, they're sort of, okay, read this manual that tells you how to do this, and here's like the financial tools and things you can use, and that's like one level of training. A whole nother level of training when you're thinking about how you actually show up face-to-face, live and in person with a client, is there was this course I went through that was like a 1 or 2 day workshop, and they would literally put you in all these role plays. They would film those role plays, and you would go back with the whole class and critique every aspect of your role play. Now, that's pretty intense, and you've got to be incredibly comfortable to just take that risk, to put yourself in that position, even show up for the class. Okay, I know people are going to say, I say too many times, or I stutter, or I pause here, or I go on and on and on at this point without making a really clear, salient point. You've got to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And if you really want to get better and improve your skills in certain areas like relationship building, public speaking, dialogue, pausing, taking a breath when you're speaking, whatever it might be. I mean, I can't tell you how many hours I've spent looking in a mirror, rehearsing and saying talking points, my elevator speech. If I'm on an elevator and somebody says, hey, in 20 seconds, tell me what you do, or those kind of things. I mean, I've done that stuff for years. And I've also recorded myself just using my phone of, okay, if I'm going to go say this for like 1 to 2 minutes, let's see how it really comes out. And is it as effective as I would want it to be? You've got to put yourself in that kind of position.
Love that. I love that. Okay, so we have time for about one more question, and Ewing has hosted. Thank you, Ty. I really love what you talk about knowing of ourselves. I was wondering what makes you always stay in this industry, and what makes you really happy, fulfilled every day in your work as a senior leader.
Yeah. So why do I stay in this industry? So I am really intrigued by the industry, but back to that point that, as you kind of move on in life, you do learn a lot of things about yourself. And one thing that I've learned about myself is, certainly if I could go back and do it all over again, and there wasn't a whole lot of this out there when I went to college, is if I wasn't doing financial services, I absolutely would be doing video game design or something in that technology world. Back when I was a very, very young age, my parents would just take me to the mall with my cousins, drop me off at like 12 years old. We'd sit there and play in the arcade the whole day and, set records and get free plays and those kind of things. And that's probably continued ever since then. And I have 2 daughters who are 16 and 17, and both of them have ultra high-end gaming laptops. They're on Discord chatting it up with their friends. I mean, they game just as much as I do. So I'm happy that I've passed that on. But without a doubt, if I wasn't doing financial services, that absolutely would be my next love, or probably even a higher love than financial services. And actually, to that end, I have pursued some of that on my own. One resource that's out there is Code Academy, where you can actually learn how to code for games and apps and whatnot. So even though I work in financial services, even though that may be a little bit of a long shot career for me, I've actually gone and taken courses myself to learn Java, Python, and things like that, just off the cuff, because I wanted to know how to do it and just have the experience. And some of those sites will literally let you build out Airbnb sites to look exactly like it does, and I've done that. And so that's just for me, like I said, I'm just intellectually curious about a lot of things. And that's something I would do, a passion that I have, and maybe I'll get to fulfill that one day if I'm lucky. And I think there was a second part to that question.
It says, what makes you happy, fulfilled every day is your work in your work as a senior leader?
Yeah. What probably makes me happy, and this will be a big change for those of you as you embark on your career. There's a part of your career where when you first get started, you might be what's called an individual contributor, right? I mean, you get hired into this associate role or some high-powered job at whatever company, and you're kind of growing and growing and developing. And maybe you do that for 5 or 10 years. But then you kind of get to this point where you say what I said. And what I said was, I feel like I have a lot to contribute, but I'm just not sure how to contribute it. And I think I could play an even more impactful role in this company if I started coaching others and developing others. And that is a really big switch to make from being very focused on self and just performing as well as you can in the role that you're in to, okay, after you get so good at that, at some point someone's going to come to you and say, hey, Amy, you're awesome at this. We want to put you in this leadership role, and now you can manage these 5 to 8 people, and now you can coach and develop them. Mm-hmm. And you kind of move from being this individual contributor to now what's on me is I've got to coach these 5 to 8 people who may come in with a bad attitude in the morning. One of them may be going through a divorce. They may have a sick parent or a sick family member, and I've got to figure out a way to work through all of that and what's really happening in people's personal lives to make sure when they're showing up for the 8 hours they're going to give me today, that we are growing a business, taking great care of clients, and being as impactful as we can be. That's a real big switch. And so I think for me, getting back to the point is I really focus on just the work it takes to actually coach and lead others, to actually get out on a sales call with someone who's struggling and model the right behaviors. Hey, I'm going to do this with you. I'm not just going to sit back at headquarters and say, why aren't you doing enough of this? Or why aren't you selling enough? Or hey, go do more. Mm-hmm. We're going to go do this call together. And you need to be relaxed. I'm here doing it side by side with you. No pressure. If we make mistakes, we make mistakes, but we're going to do this together. And I'm going to try to model for you the right way to engage with this client, the right way to handle conflict, the right way to position during tense moments of the call so that you actually learn and build your skills on how to do this better the second and third time. That's where you make this transition from individual contributor to actually coach, manager, leading others and doing that effectively. And when you do that inside very large scale organizations and you're managing 30, 50, 100, 500 people in different business lines, the fact is Ty can't be out there anymore doing that as an individual contributor. I can't do that on my own. I can't do the work of 500 people on my own. Mm-hmm. I have to improve my skills of actually coaching, inspiring, and motivating others. That's what turns me on right now.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ty. Let's see. We are at 6:01, so I wanted to wrap up and just let you know, Ty, that we're so appreciative of you being here with us. I feel like students probably had a ton more questions they still wanted to ask you, so perhaps we could bring you back on for like an encore presentation at some point. But we just are so appreciative, and I want to thank the students for also being here today and contributing more towards your future. This is time you're taking out of your summer to be here, just like it's time that Ty has taken out of his off day or off hour, his happy hour, to be
somewhere
to be here on this work webinar with us. So thanks to everybody, and I hope everyone has a good night. Ty, I'm going to stay on for a second if you want to hang out.
Okay. Sure. Well, thanks everybody for listening. That's probably a coaching opportunity for me to stop talking so much, but I felt like I had a lot to share today. So if you need anything from me, feel free to reach out. I wish you all the best. It's on you to go out there and represent the university going forward. I'm like an old guy, right? You're like the new class that's got to push the organization forward. So I want to give you all the support I can to go do that the right way. Thank you. Hope all of you have a great day.